From migrants to refugees, the new plight of Central Americans is a collaboration between Univision News and Faro, a digital news outlet in El Salvador founded in 1998. Faro means lighthouse or beacon, and that's what it is. With a limited budget, it investigates crimes and human rights abuses and tracks the growing gang and drug violence throughout Central America. This is a historic moment because it's the first time that Spanish language media outlets have won a Hillman Prize. And the prize is well-deserved. From Migrants to Refugees is a devastating and beautifully produced series that includes long-form writing, photography, video, and animation in English and Spanish. It profiles one major refugee-producing country, El Salvador, and three major receiving countries, Mexico, Belize, and Costa Rica. It's the story of a refugee crisis in Central America for which the U.S. bears much responsibility. In the 1980s, the U.S.-funded wars in Central America created a wave of refugees fleeing violence. They made it to the U.S. only to have their children get swept into gangs in L.A. and other major cities. Then in the 1990s, the U.S. deported 40,000 gang members back to Central America, where they have spread fear and violence throughout the region. Now a new generation of desperate refugees is seeking safety, and the cycle repeats itself. We meet Dalia, the first transgender woman to receive asylum in Costa Rica, or Hayden, a 13-year-old who took refuge in Mexico after seeing too many gang-related murders. We hear the story of a woman known simply as grandmother, an elderly Salvadorian widow who still lives near the well where gang members dumped her grandson's body. Her daughter and son-in-law have fled the gangs. It doesn't matter if someone tells you something happened to me, don't come back, she warns her family over social media. We are introduced to a father and son forensic investigation team and the police officers risking their lives to fight the gangs in El Salvador. Tens of thousands of people are fleeing criminal and state-sponsored violence in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and they are traversing the same routes as the economic migrants who came before them. But unlike these predecessors, these refugees are being pursued. They're running for their lives because they can't pay extortion money to gang members, or because they're related to someone on the gang's enemy list, or because they just happen to witness a crime on the street. Anyone can become a target. The journey itself is dangerous, fraught with exploitation and violence. Facilities that were once shelters for migrants on their path north have morphed into refugee camps where deeply traumatized people wait in limbo. Unable to work while their asylum claims are being processed, some refugees have decided whether to stay on in poverty, uncertainty, and loneliness, or go home to face almost certain death. This project is notable for the scale of its ambition, the depths of its humanity, and the poetic sensibilities of its storytelling. I am proud to present the 2018 Hillman Prize for Web Journalism to Amundina Torre, Maye Primera of Univision, and Carlos Martinez of El Faro, who are here on behalf of their team.
We would like to dedicate this award especially to David, Arsenio, Marcia, Freddy, Talia, and the other dozens of refugees, some of which you saw in the different videos, who we wish that that could be here today in this event and in the safety and security of this country. They are some of the bravest people that we have ever met, and they show the dignity and courage that we humans universally should strive for. They look for the best for their children and the ones who will come after them, put to the test of the most grueling, most horrific circumstances. The forced movement of people around the globe is one of the direst crises of our time. Central America is at the heart of this crisis, and it's a crisis that none of the countries north of them will admit. Mexico, Costa Rica, Belize, and yes, also the United States. The migrant caravan in recent headlines is only the tip of the iceberg. Those 200 migrants are only part of the hundreds of thousands who have fled and continue fleeing El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They were estimated in 160,000 by the UNHCR in 2016 alone. Listening to NPR this morning, Jeff Sessions came on air commenting on the spike of border apprehensions for the second month in a row. He said, if you don't want to be separated from your children, then don't bring them across the border illegally. After working on this project, I think we can assure Mr. Sessions that the only thing that differentiates him from some of the refugees that we met is that he was born in the US and has an American passport, and they were born in El Salvador, in a poor colonia or neighborhood, and they have a Salvadoran passport. It is critically important to understand that these people don't flee out of choice. They flee out of necessity, because there's literally nothing else they can do except to die. They flee horrors that we will never need to imagine or endure, and they meet a system or a series of systems that fail them once and again. It's sad to report that since we reported this project, the refugees that we met and that we traveled with, most didn't get to peaceful asylum situations that they had hoped for. David and his family, who is the story that was in one of the animations that you just saw, they fled El Salvador when one of their sons disappeared and probably murdered, a daughter was raped, and another son was coerced into joining the MS-13 gang. They languished for months in southern Mexico, waiting for refuge. In the shelter they were waiting, 2 gang members from the same town that they were in El Salvador recognized them, setting off a new escapade in a tiny town where there was nowhere to run to. This family's case was one of the only 2 cases awarded refuge by the Mexican government out of hundreds of applications vetted and submitted by this shelter. They were the lucky ones, yet they ended up imprisoned in a rented room in a tiny town in southern Mexico, unable to work or leave because of threats. They wrote to us saying, "I heard there are better asylum opportunities in Spain or in Australia, please help." Again, desperate to leave. But internationally, they won't be given asylum in another country because they already set foot in Mexico first. Then there's Marcia and Freddy, a young couple from Honduras with young children. Their case was rejected in Mexico, and they're now asking for asylum in Guatemala, aware that in the same gangs that they fled from are a step away. There's Arsenio and Mari, also Salvadorans, who have been waiting for asylum in Belize for over 2 years. He's been beaten because of racism. The government didn't allow them to work, and they were scraping to eat. No asylum case has been approved there since the 1980s. Talia was the first transgender woman to be granted refugee status in Costa Rica. She's homeless, discriminated, and has barely any means to live. While escaping death, these refugees go through really dangerous territories, something that we got firsthand experience while on reporting. Carlos, our colleague here, and our colleague Victor escaped kidnapping by a hair in Chiapas, in the border between Guatemala and Mexico. There were constant reminders of just how unsafe it's for these people and these refugees to search for safety. We would also like to emphasize on the importance of service journalism. We wonder sometimes if who will read or watch our reporting, especially if it's long form at a time when attention spans are short. It was so rewarding to see in this case that it served an informationally starved, vulnerable community, with comments from refugees pouring in from social media. At last, we would like to thank you and dedicate this to our colleagues at El Faro and Univision newsrooms who worked tirelessly on this and can't be here with us today, reporting, writing, photographing, editing, illustrating, animating. This was true collaborative journalism and teamwork. At a time of dwindling resources, there are fewer and fewer newsrooms committing to in-depth reporting and its associated time and costs. Our own Univision newsroom is going through layoffs right now, and we lost over 30% of our digital team, including 2 people who worked on this project. Investing in this type of reporting and investigative work is more needed than ever. It is a true honor for both of our newsrooms to receive this award and shed more light on these refugee crises. Thank you.